Welcome back, and back to the servant song. The strophe 53, 1-3 is about the rejection of the servant. The Hebrew verb in the first clause is a cal passive, who believed what we heard. Although several English translations treat it as if it were the hifil, who believed what we caused to be heard. So, who believed our message, or who believed our report? Who believed what was heard from us? You see that in ESV, NIV, NASB. They conclude, it seems, that the referent of the we and the our must be Isaiah and the prophets. But I think they've got a serious grammatical problem with the cal passive, eh? Who believed what was heard by us? If the servant is Israel, then the we would refer to the antecedent Gentile nations, remember in 52, 14 and 15, who were amazed at Israel's suffering. If, however, the servant refers to an individual, then the we refers to the nation. And on grammatical grounds, it seems best to identify the speaker as Israel, a future repentant Israel, to be sure. And we'll see that Isaiah is not alone in fully expecting the conversion of the nation in the future. I mean, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel all share that conviction. Zechariah declares the word of Yahweh, I will pour out on the house of David, on the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the spirit of grace and of supplication, so that they will look on me whom they have pierced. Almost seems like he's borrowing language from the servant song here, right? They will look upon me whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. They'll weep bitterly over him like the bitter weeping over a firstborn. The Apostle John in Revelation 1:7 expands the expectation to all the nations. Behold, he's coming with the clouds. A tagline to Daniel 7. And every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. And all the tribes of the earth will mourn over him. George Adam Smith suggests that it seems the Holy Spirit intentionally left the identity vague, however, to allow each hearer, each reader, to include his or her own name in that confession that follows. Well, verse 1, the rejection of the message spoken, what we heard, and the message enacted, the arm of the Lord, metaphor for his power, his might. See, in this context, the arm of the Lord refers to God's powers displayed in the miracles of those who proclaimed his coming from Moses on, as well as the miracles accompanying the ministry of the servant himself. Remember what John reports about those who saw this revelation of the Word become flesh in John 6? He writes, though some believed him for the time being out of amazement, they ultimately rejected. See, argument and evidence might convince someone, but it doesn't produce faith. Well, the point I take is that this fits the first advent of the Messiah. There really is no other historical context that fits. Verse 2, the rejection of the person. 5 times the third masculine singular pronoun is used here, indicating that it's a person rather than the message that's in focus. You see, from his birth and childhood in the carpenter's shop in that backwater town of Nazareth, he was unpretentious. From the perspective of the New Testament biographers, he grew up alone. He just didn't catch anyone's eye. He wasn't a looker. He just wasn't what they were expecting, and his humble appearance didn't square with expectations. Verse 3, the nature of his rejection. First of all, as conducted by his own people, he was treated with contempt and abandoned. He was treated as an offense. They hid their faces from him in horror. During his ministry, there were those who saw Jesus as a spiritual offense. And in the end, no doubt, there were those who symbolically just looked away. They crucified him as a criminal. They called good evil and evil good. He was devalued by his contemporaries. And how did this rejection affect the servant? The text says, he was a man of sorrows, well acquainted with grief. Choli. The word for grief here refers to affliction. It can be physical, so sickness, suffering, but it also can refer to emotional affliction, anguish, grief. I think the context here indicates the latter is how it's used here. It's not to say that he was never known by others to have been sick. I don't know if Jesus caught a cold but the point is that he himself knew grief firsthand. If you think of it, he lived among the oppressed, the sick, the dying. Most of all, just the devastation of sin. And his bearing the sin of the people brought an unbearable anguish upon him that resulted in his death. So, contrary to what some, like Rabbi Yehuda the Saint that we referred to earlier, there's no basis in this text for concluding that Jesus was by nature sickly. Next session, we'll look at the third strophe that teaches about the atonement of the servant of the Lord. So we'll see you in a bit.